Dr. Sabrina Siegel with the Neuroscience Education Institute, and twice a month, I sit down with a renowned mental health care expert to discuss breakthroughs and best practices for treating patients with mental illness. We recently spoke with Dr. John Rady, and he shared his fascinating personal anecdotes and research findings linking improvements in a myriad of brain functions in the presence of high levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And today, I have the pleasure of interviewing psychiatric nurse practitioner Michele Novella as we dive in more about what BDNF does for your brain health. Welcome, Michele Novella.
Welcome, Dr. Siegel. I am so glad to be back here, and I enjoy speaking to you. And this is one of the subjects that we can't talk enough about. So,
absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to talk about this with you. My first question for you is, do you think that psychiatry could be doing a much better job at promoting the extraordinary positive effect of exercising as part of psychiatric treatment?
Right. Wouldn't you laugh if I said, no, I think we're doing fine? No,
Yes, I think so.
This is an easy question. Of course we should. And what's interesting, and we spoke a little bit about this previously, is that I would like to invite the marketing realm and the trainers out there and anyone who's in the technological field where they make video representations of when we talk about brain chemical changes. We need help. We need their help. We need help on learning how to better motivate our patients. We need help in pictorial representations of what it looks like when a brain is bathed in adequate amounts of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Mm-hmm. It's a very difficult subject because the patients that we see frequently have depression, for instance. And we all know that one of the main symptoms of depression is amotivation, right? So sometimes I'll get a patient who's new to me and they come in my office and they explain their symptoms and I pretty much, have narrowed it down. I'm pretty sure they have depression. And when I start to talk about treatment, I draw a picture of a peace symbol, a circle that has three different domains. Yeah. And I said, this is my own particular treatment visual. I said, I didn't get it from anyone. You can copy it. For me, seeing something in a pictorial sense is so helpful. And I said, treatment is not cookie cutter. Basically, the way I think of it mentally is one part of treatment for depression or anxiety or ADHD or bipolar disorder is medication management and perhaps the use of some supplements, some judicious use of supplements. Mm-hmm. The other third of treatment for me, and equally as important, notice these are not one is more important than the other, is therapy. I insist that patients who see me at least do 10 sessions of therapy. I would prefer that they do more, but I know that sometimes it's difficult for them to find the time to do therapy. But even if their diagnosis is simply attention deficit disorder, I need to know that when they come in and I ask them questions and I say, tell me the kind of behavioral coping skills you've been using along with taking your medicine, I need to know that they know what a coping skill is. Right? Mm-hmm. That they have even 2 or 3 things that they say, like I now keep a journal, I now keep a day planner because the therapist taught me that. So I know that we're talking from the same space and they've heard the words that I'm going to be using with them. And the final part of the peace sign, the other third component of treatment, regardless of the diagnosis, is exercise. And of course, patients look at it and grimace. Sometimes, but some of them smile. But I say, I've been doing this not nearly as long as some of the psychiatrists who've been on your show, who've been in practice for 45 years. God bless them. But I've been doing this for 24 years now. And time again, I can tell you that exercise is absolutely crucial to the speed of full recovery, to an improved sense of well-being, and to a patient's sense of self-efficacy. right? We use that
Absolutely.
word in school a lot, and we haven't used it since. We call it an internal locus of control. So when you have an illness, for instance, I'll use cancer. All these different providers are telling you what they're going to do to you and what you have to make a decision on and what kind of chemo and do we do radiation first. And basically, we have to do whatever they tell us to do. We have very little internal locus of control because these people know how to treat cancer. The same is true for mental health. When patients come into our office, they don't feel like they have been successful in their own efforts at treating their problem or their illness. And something spurred them at that particular time to come to see me or whoever they're seeing. And so telling them that there's something that they can do that will improve their own internal locus of control is so critical and crucial because it means they can help affect change in a positive way. The way to do that isn't necessarily all flowers and rainbows. It gets a little trickier, but we know that when patients have a sense of self-efficacy and an internal locus of control, regardless of the diagnosis they hold, that they tend to do better and they get better faster. So basically, that's my vision, how I perceive treatment. So when I start to talk about exercise with patients, they'll say, I know, exercise increases endorphins. And I go, right, that's so interesting. I think everybody in the world has heard that, and you're right. Endorphins, what are endorphins? And they say those are like feel-good chemicals. And I'm like, that's exactly right. But in addition, and perhaps more importantly, exercise, especially cardio, and it does not have to be marathon running. It means some form of exercise where your heart rate is elevated. It might be difficult for you to have a conversation with somebody next to you. So if you're walking, you don't want to go stroll and window shop. You want to continue moving for about 15 to 20 minutes. That constitutes cardiovascular exercise. Just think of your heart moving more quickly. Basically, doing just 20 minutes of cardiovascular type exercise 3 to 5 times per week will vastly increase the amount of the chemical we call BDNF, Brain-Derived Neurotrophic Factor. And for patients who like information, I always write the initials down because I'll say, when you're home, go look up on YouTube and become an expert on this. It was funny, the provider who spoke before I did, Dr. Rady, he said, what did he call it? He called BDNF
the miracle grow.
Yes.
For the brain.
Actually, what's funny is I call it miracle grow, but he used a similar term. And I said, oh my gosh, great minds think alike. And he called it brain fertilizer because I wrote it down. And I said, oh my gosh, I would love to meet him because I always say, think of miracle grow. If you have annuals in your garden, they're probably beautiful. But when I spoke to one of the people at the local nursery, I said, why do your flowers here always look so much more vibrant and so much more radiant? And the woman looked at me and said, miracle grow, right? So since then, I've been a believer. So basically, there's a chemical in our brain, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that is the building block or the chemical that spurs on neurogenesis. We used to think years ago that you had X amount of brain cells, and if you had an alcoholic beverage, you would kill off 1,000. Remember those days? They're like, oh, you just killed 2,000. But it's only been in the last maybe 20 years we've realized the brain is much, much more elegant in terms of its ability to change and grow, right? We call that neuroplasticity, and thank God for it. If there's an injury or a concussion, let's say, we know that with the right ingredients, exercise, perhaps some vitamins, perhaps some omega-3 fatty acids, the brain can make, through BDNF, more easy connections. So the transmission of the nerves, the nerve impulse from one neuron to the next becomes much more facile. And we can increase the number of connections that occur in the brain. So your brain is not static. That's the most exciting news that has come across psychiatry in the past 20 years. We used to think what you have is what you have, but we know now that's absolutely not true. We know that there's 2 times in your life where your brain is doing most of its growing and pruning. The first time is when you're a fetus in your mom's belly, which is why we encourage moms who are pregnant not to ingest toxic materials, right, because they're brain growth. And the second time is during the periods of adolescence, about 17 to 25 years old, right? And I always tell my patients, I know it's very hard, but you want to protect your brain for the next few years. Please try not to use toxins in terms of overuse of substances. Make sure you wear a helmet because your brain is doing so many important functions. And this is it. This is the second huge push. After this, you'll still be able to help your brain to change and grow, but it will be a little bit less rigorous. And, this is the time to really see how perfectly you can get your brain to be as an adult. Okay, so back to Miracle-Gro. So if you think about all the different brain chemicals, and I know that all of our patients know these things. They understand serotonin, they understand norepinephrine, and they understand dopamine. And they do understand that we believe that some of the reasons that we get anxiety or somebody has issues with attention deficit or perhaps depression is probably related to a change in one of these neurotransmitters, right? So what we've learned is BDNF actually toughens our brain cells. And I love that word. I love the word toughens because it's a simple word we can all relate to. If anybody's ever done hot yoga, I think they'll relate to this completely because it's extremely hard to do. I don't recommend doing it right out of the box. Go see your provider, make sure your heart is fine. But basically it's yoga that's done in a hot room and it's extremely difficult. It's rigorous. Your heart rate gets very high. And I remember thinking, I almost feel my brain cultivating mental toughness when I'm here. I know that I'm stronger after doing these sessions than before I was. And if I'm stronger and I can get through 90 minutes of yoga in a very hot room where they only let you wipe your sweat twice or 3 times, it sounds crazy. I know if I can get through this, I probably can get through so much more in my life that I might previously have thought that I've been too weak to tackle. Wow, this is novel for me. I'm not sure I have the skill set to get through it. No, because mental toughness is fluid. If we have a skill set or a toolbox of mental toughness skills, we can use it for so many different situations. And of course, we're all thinking about what we've been through over the past 3 months. If we need mental toughness, now is the time, right? Because none of us has any past frame of reference. What do we do during COVID quarantine?
Right.
None of us has ever gone through that. But instead, you might increase your thinking and say, well, I've never done this, but there have been other difficult life situations, and I got through those. How did I get through those? Probably, if you did it the right way, you were using your support systems, you were talking to friends and neighbors, you were exercising, which I'm just going to assume that you were sleeping 8 or 9 hours, and you were basically cultivating that mental toughness and putting tools in your toolbox, right? And everybody's is a little bit different. So I really emphasize to patients, even though they're going through an episode of depression, especially, and they tell me, Michele, I can barely get out of bed in the morning, and you're taking out a calendar that you want me to chart my exercise. I mean, are you serious? Like, do you need a reality check? And I go, I know. And I really do. I join with them because we've all been there. I said, I understand completely. It sounds so bizarre that I'm going to ask you to do something that maybe you haven't been doing recently during a time of illness. But unfortunately, depression especially is one of those illnesses where the patient's efforts are absolutely critical, and especially in terms of the speed of recovery. And so if I put it in those terms and I'll say, we can just do the medications. I'll do my best job. I'll try to match the medications to your genetics or to the symptom profile you discussed. I will encourage you to take some supplements. I'll help your sleep. But if we do that, it may take longer for you to get better. And gosh knows if you've ever been through an episode of depression, every day is a long day. And the faster you imagine yourself to get better, the better. So back to my little peace symbol, I tell them, if we do one of the things, we'll get better eventually. If we do 2 of the things in this circle, we'll get better probably a bit faster. If we incorporate and use all 3 of these modalities, therapy, exercise, medications, and supplements, we will optimize our chances of getting through this. best.
I love that.
Yeah. And it puts the choice in their lap. It's sort of like, and I say to them, I will do whatever you think is the way you want to do it. But I will tell them this, every time you come to see me, please know this, I will be speaking about exercise every time, because I just know that you will feel so much better. Maybe not after the first few times. Maybe you'll be like, gee, this is rotten and I really hate her. But I know about BDNF. I know about mental toughness. I know about the increased dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and even melatonin to some degree. I also know that it helps to increase our brain's production of natural endogenous endorphins and natural endogenous endocannabinoids. Those are the brain's mechanisms of tolerating pain and helping us to feel better and be less anxious. And we know for the endocannabinoid system, those chemicals help with our ability to negotiate stressors, to improve our mood, and very importantly, to increase our sense of safety. And boy, don't we need that right now. Just the fact that if we watch the news, which I refuse to do, and I encourage my patients not to do it as well, but we have this sense of not feeling secure and safe. And that's one of the very basic human needs. We need to feel safe in our environment. So if that's something that's important to you and you want to take control of it, the answer is once again, exercise. Okay? Yeah. And safety and certainty about what will happen next is something that we definitely have some real control about. So we know that the brain is made up of billions of neurons, and they all communicate through the electrical impulses, the nerve fibers known as axons. And as we were discussing, Sabrina, we were discussing it would be so lovely if we could show patients in almost like a cartoon video exactly what happens when their body has more of BDNF present, more Miracle-Gro. We could see that those connections are stronger and tougher, and there's more of the good chemicals circulating, right? And we also know that it makes other factors that I won't get into here, but there's one that helps us manage and negotiate insulin and blood sugar. And I know Dr. Rady discussed that, the IGF-1, the insulin growth factor. It helps to keep our blood sugar levels at the right level. I think he also spoke about how important BDNF works on your prefrontal cortex. I love prefrontal cortex talk. If anybody ever wants to call me to discuss it, I'm ready. It's like my most exciting thing to talk about. That is a center for all of our executive functions. And wow, these days, our PFCs are so critical. It helps us to try to attend to what's in front of us in the moment. It helps us to sort of filter out the extraneous stimuli that are also frequently around us, like TVs in the background or children yelling, or they're sitting in front of their computer because they're doing their schoolwork at home. So basically, that's another function of your prefrontal cortex. Working memory, right? Using what we have just recently learned and having it stay there long enough for us to get to the end of the situation or the end of the problem at hand. It also is the place that helps us take time when we're given the choice of how we should act. And I explain this in depth to teenagers. I tell them, during that period of 17 to 25, and your PFC is growing and changing and shifting, really, your brain's ability, because we are basically flesh and blood, is decreased for a while. And sometimes it makes you more impulsive. It's not a character flaw. I remember when my son was 14, and I don't know what he did that day. There was a myriad of things that he did, and as well as his brother. And I remember looking at him and saying, why did you do that? What were you thinking? And of course, everybody here who has a teenager knows exactly what I'm going to say next. He said, I have no idea. And he wasn't lying. He did not know why. He could not put the pieces together that if I do A, B, and C will occur. So impulsivity, that's another reason why we have to get teenagers exercising, so that there's a moment of pause. And in that 1 second of pause, they may say, you know what? I'm going to go find the helmet and put it on, because maybe mom or dad is going to yell at me if I don't. Think of how many lives that would save alone, right?
Yeah.
Sorting information. It basically helps to change the architecture of the brain.
Absolutely. I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I think that's such a great reminder. So we know that due to its neuroprotective effects, BDNF might play a role in mood disorders as well. So let's dig a bit deeper into that. How can the public, and not just patients with brain illnesses, kind of shore up their capacity to negotiate the current stressors associated with COVID and the many changes that it has brought?
I love when you ask questions. It's such a timely question, because really I'm not only focusing on patients who have brain illnesses. We all have been struggling. I know from talking to patients and talking to friends, this recent situation in our world has changed how we think, how we negotiate stressors, how we get along with our family. And we're going to see more changes and more stressors as time goes on. We're not done, if that's the right way to put it.
Oh, yeah.
So because there's a huge sense of not being in control, right? Even if we wear a mask and we're very sensitive to washing items that we bring home and keeping distance from somebody who is near us at a store, the actual control we have over all this is very tenuous. It's very, very tenuous. And that doesn't help us on a day-to-day basis. Even people who've never had sleep disturbance are telling me they're waking up at 3 a.m. Or now that they've recently been unemployed, they're going to bed at 2 a.m. So there's so many disruptions that have gone on. Doing something that you have control over. And the next part is so important, that you don't judge yourself in terms of your proficiency, right? You don't need to be an Olympic athlete. Sometimes patients will say, Michele, do you know that I used to run marathons? And I'll be like, that's amazing. That's really awesome. But I know where your line of thinking is going. You're saying right now, geez, there's no way in the world I could ever run 10 miles. And there's a negative thought pattern that's going to spiral from that. I don't want you to go there. I'm happy that you did marathons. I hope you do them again someday if you want to. But right now, I am discussing putting on your sneakers, which takes effort, and walking out your front door and walking 10 minutes away from your house if you live on a road where that's not dangerous, of course, and walking 10 minutes back. That's it. That's 10 minutes plus 10 minutes. That's 20 minutes where I know your blood has circulated more vigorously than it would otherwise. And that simple act of having the blood and the oxygen circulate through your brain will increase your BDNF. And we also know, and I don't know the reasoning, somebody can jump in and add it to the show if they have the opportunity. When you exercise outdoors, your brain seems to make more BDNF than when you exercise indoors. Even when they control for light, that our eyes need to have sunlight hit our pupils, even when they've controlled for that. So going for a walk outside, looking at trees if you're lucky enough to have those around, 10 minutes out the door and 10 minutes back. And basically you've increased your body's sense of internal locus of control. You controlled what you did for those past few minutes. I encourage people so strongly, please don't judge yourself. Please. We judge ourselves so harshly. Think about what you would say to a 75-year-old friend who perhaps hasn't exercised in 20 years, who got their sneakers on and went for a 20-minute walk. What would you say to them? You would be a cheerleader. You'd be like, wow, that was great. I'm sure you heard some cracks and some aches and, the muscles were like, what the heck is going on here? But you would be so positive and encouraging to them. Please try to adopt that attitude. So when you're out there exercising, you at least come back and you say, you know what? I didn't do it yesterday, but I did it today. And one step is the beginning of many more steps that will proceed in the future. So making it a habit right now, doing it with your children. I'm going to do a quick segue and give some props to a physician who changed my life at a time when the world was not going very well here in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Dr. James Gordon, who runs the Center for Mind-Body Medicine and who still has a very active presence online and otherwise, he came to Connecticut 6 times without any money or grants, because one of the people that works at the genetics company that I use frequently, Genemind, called me and said, "Oh my gosh, Michele, I can't believe what you poor providers are going through. How are you doing it?" And I said, like we always do, we're just putting one foot in front of the other. He put me in touch with Dr. James Gordon, who on his own accord took the train from Washington, D.C. to Newtown, Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and said, "Get me a room that's big enough to accommodate as many providers and doctors and nurse practitioners as you want, and I will bequeath as much information to you guys as I can, because I want to help." And I will forever be grateful for that. One of the exercises that he frequently endorses, no matter what the situation, is a minute of moving and shaking. And so we all stood up in the circle because, of course, whatever he said to do, we did. If he said bark like a dog for 2 hours, we would have been doing it if we thought it would help our practice. So he said, "Close your eyes, and I'm going to put some music on." I think it was sort of like African drumming. It was beautiful. Nobody look at anyone else because we all look silly. Just shake your body. Move your body, shake your body, and do it vigorously if you can, but don't hurt yourself. Move your head, and if you want to keep pace to the rhythm, do that. And I will tell you, none of us looked at each other because we could only imagine how funny we looked, right? But who cares? That was it was probably part of the point. After that, he said, "How do you feel?" And it was amazing. Just from 1 minute of moving and shaking, I could feel my heart rate was elevated. I felt a smile come over my face because we all were laughing, thinking, "Oh my gosh, if anybody just videotaped that and put it anywhere, like we would be the laughing stock." But that was part of the fun of it. That alone, doing that after 2 or 3 sessions of the day, just to get your blood moving and to sort of, put a reset button on your body's ability to get through the day, that's exercise. If somebody writes that down on their sheet and says, "I did moving and shaking 4 times today," I would be so thrilled. I was saying to you earlier, I have stickers for adults. I don't see children. And I actually have a whole slew of stickers because I like them. And when they bring me their exercise sheet where they actually log what they've done for exercise, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but we're always aiming for better, I give them a sticker. And of course, they're not really surprised because it's me, and they figure, who knows what she's going to do this time. We know, every day is a new day for Michele. And sometimes I'm in a good mood. I'll let them pick the sticker that they want. But I give them the sticker, and I make a copy of their exercise log. And I say, "This is part of your permanent record," because it's that important to me. It's as important to me as you telling me that you're taking your medication. So for all the people out there who just don't know how they're going to get through the day, even if you tell your kids, "You guys, we're all going to stop what we're doing and we're going to put some music on or not. And we're going to close our eyes and we are going to just move and shake in place." And if anybody wants to see Dr. Gordon do it, they can log on to cmbm.org. He's a wonderful man. He is wise and he's kind. So even something as simple as that can give you a sense of control, and it will get the circulation in your body going. And we know that energy begets energy, right? Mm-hmm. Once we start something, we tend to continue it. And those first 2 to 3 weeks might be difficult. I know sometimes patients come back and they'll say, "I started out really good. I even joined the gym. My boyfriend said he would help me, so he's been coming too. But then I got a cold and then I stopped." And I said, "You know what? I was waiting for that because something always happens, right? Anytime we try an exercise regime, either one of your kids gets sick or that it just happens. It's just, I absolutely just wait for it. And I tell the patient, "Okay, so I understand. Makes sense. If your child was sick or if you had a cold, you didn't want to exercise. It was too exertional. What do we do now?" And then I just wait. I wait for them and they go, I go, "What do we do now? Do we continue to not exercise or do we pick up where we left off?" Right? Just like with so many other things in life, we pick up where we left off. We don't give ourselves a hard time, right? We know that if you stop, you basically have to start again. It's just the nature of life. And thank God life is forgiving and life is long for many of us. So start again. That's all you can do. And then at least they breathe a sigh of relief. But I know that we all could be doing a better job of somehow imparting the knowledge that we have about how incredible this exercise is for treatment. And the best part of all, it's free. It's free, because they'll tell me like, oh, I wish I could afford a Peloton, or I can't afford a gym membership. And I'm like, I've been doing this a long time. So like I could counterpoint every single thing that you tell me, so like we can keep going, but when you stop, I'm going to have an idea or a suggestion. So they laugh and I go, all right, what is it? And I'll say, just put your sneakers on, make sure that if your knees hurt, then maybe you can find a pool at some point or borrow your neighbor's pool. Even if you're just standing in place, I can remember my mother when I was 12, standing in place and moving her arms like a propeller in circles. Mm-hmm. And back then, nobody exercised. I was like, Mom, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm exercising. It was so funny. It was like hysterical for me because it must have been a new fad, right? It was before running. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting. But we've come a long way. We know if you have the opportunity to have a trainer, I know for myself personally, there was one time in my life where I just couldn't get my motivation where it needed to be. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do it. I was struggling. And my best friend, who was my exercise partner, had moved to Florida. I decided for the first time to use a trainer. And I don't typically like using trainers, but I needed him for the motivation part. Yeah. And I said, you know what? This is an investment. I'm going to do 10 sessions. And he would show up at my door. And when a trainer shows up at your door, you're not turning him away.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was such a delight. He really got me back on the right path. So being creative and knowing that your provider is going to bring it up every time. And providers, please do that for your patients. Just as much as you tell them, take your medicine every day, right? Yeah. And try to sleep. Yeah.
It's accountability, right?
It's total accountability. And, and I'll say, I'm not Weight Watchers. I don't really do this because I want you to lose 10 pounds, although that would be nice if it's nice for you. I'm not so invested in your heart, although your heart will benefit as well. I'm being selfish. I want BDNF. And I want it in you. And they'll be like, all right, you got it. And they go out and they're pumped up. I'll say, Corinne, give them a calendar because we make our own calendars. And I'll be like, remember, don't come back without it. And if they don't bring it back the next time, they'll say, but I did exercise. I'll say, go home and take a picture with your phone. And please do send it to the office email because I make it like it's a piece of gold, right? Because it's like, wow, you did this because I asked you to. I love the patients who come back and right off the bat, it's the patients with OCD typically. And I'm like, wow, oh my gosh, like since the last time I saw you, you went from nothing to 3 times a week. How'd you do it? And they're like, well, you told me to. And I'm like, oh my gosh, nobody ever does what I tell them to. I have 3 teenagers, like, this is a whole new experience for me. And they look at me like I have 3 heads, but it's so true. And I'm like, and I thank them. I'm like, I do appreciate the fact that you did your part. This is going to be easy breezy because I know that if I do my medications decently and I don't, not tell you to do something, I know that we're going to get to where we want to be and we're going to get there fast because you're willing to do what it takes. Thank you so much for that. So anyway.
Yeah. So, and I love all of your tips in terms of how we can help people to be held accountable. How can we endorse patients to cultivate mental toughness during these times, especially right now, like you touched on?
I would say persistence to the point of being on the border of ad nauseum. Really, because if we repeat the same things over and over, and I was absolutely enjoying Dr. Rady's podcast so tremendously. Everything he said, I was hanging on his words. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm with him. I'm behind him. If only we could make that kind of enthusiasm in the population so they could see, because I do think when people understand something, they can embrace it, right? Mm-hmm. At least for myself, I have to understand, why am I doing this? How does exercise translate to mental toughness? I really don't see it. But when you tell them there's this chemical cascade, it's a Miracle-Gro chemical, and literally it will shore up the strength of the connections in your brain so that when your brain has a situation that is anxiety provoking, without you even doing anything different, there's a much higher likelihood that your brain will figure out how to get through and negotiate that stressor. Isn't that amazing? Our bodies want to do the right thing. So if you do what you're supposed to do, it's like putting gas in the tank of your car. We put gas in the car because we know if we do, the car is going to drive us to destination B, right? And why and how, I have no idea. I don't know how engines work, but there's combustion and I don't know. But I do it because I believe that gas is what gets my car moving. If we encourage patients to learn and we continue to drill into them, this is not just about having a beach body and, defying gravity so that your tush looks better than it did last year. Really? I mean, those are beautiful things. And I allowed all the people who are very much into that, God bless them.
Yeah.
But really, if they knew what the brain's benefits were, how could they not do it? Or at least not try, right? They would, and if they knew that it would potentially shore off the chances of them getting early onset dementia, or potentially even lessen the likelihood that they get Alzheimer's. Oh my goodness, who wouldn't do that? Who wouldn't try? And we know that it does that too.
What is known about genetic polymorphisms and BDNF? We recently have identified SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism, where coding for one's production of BDNF lies. Can you explain a little more about that?
Yes, it's very exciting. So we all know, everybody's heard about genetic testing, and we know about the Human Genome Project, which basically coded all the genes in the human body. Now we're trying to figure out which SNP accounts for what trait or what behavior or what color hair you have. We're trying to figure that out. So basically, we have discovered the SNP, the SNP, that codes for how much endogenous BDNF your body makes, right? So I use a lot of genetic testing, and I'm going to mention Genemind, and I'll also mention their wonderful, wonderful Dan Dowd, who is a brilliant man who reads PubMed all day. And I'm always calling him with questions. Basically, he explained to me that when one parent passes down the, let's just call it the not ideal gene, and so basically that means that that person is heterozygous for the variation. That means their body doesn't make ideal amounts of BDNF, right? Does that mean you have a death sentence? No, but it does mean that you may have a slightly higher likelihood of having anxiety or potentially having ADHD. It's not the only thing, but it probably is one of the factors. If somebody's parents both pass down the gene for not making enough BDNF, that's actually what my genetics came up. So we call that homozygous. If they're homozygous for the genes that code for how much BDNF we make, there's only 3 or 4% of the population that actually has homozygous low BDNF. It's sort of sobering, but basically knowing that and seeing it on a piece of paper spurred me to action. And when Dan Dowd said to me, Michele, it's not the greatest thing to find out, but here's the good part. We know that people with this genetic polymorphism actually make more BDNF when they do exercise than somebody who has normal genetic profiles for BDNF. So he said, if you get out there and exercise, right. I was like, oh my God.
That is so exciting.
I know. And let's face it, fear is a motivating factor sometimes. When somebody has a cardiac event, they tend to lose weight and they tend to be out there walking. And that's okay. It shouldn't be the only motivator. But basically, and he said, listen, don't focus on the negatives. But if you exercise, your brain is going to make more BDNF than somebody who actually makes decent amounts. So, of course, after I hung up the phone, I had the question, what else can I do to increase my BDNF? Because exercise is a lot of work and it makes me sweat and I had to put sneakers on and some days I don't feel like it. I'm sure there's a vitamin or a supplement or somebody can do voodoo on me. I don't care. I want more. And guess what the answer is? There's not much that even comes close to cardio. And so that was the bottom line. What are the other things? Having a novel environment, making sure that your brain doesn't get bored, doing all those silly things that they tell you, brushing your teeth with your left hand if you're a righty, taking a different route to work. I know zinc was one of the supplements that they mentioned specifically. I've heard turmeric is another one. These are things that you certainly should do to help your BDNF, but I wish I could tell you it was the big kahuna. It is not. Exercise, and I'll say it the last time. Exercise. And I'm right there with everybody who's going, oh, damn, I wish it was easier. But that's the long and the short of it. And luckily, Genemind is coming out with sort of like 23andMe. They're going to be promoting a product very soon where patients can just purchase their own kit and get information on several genes, and one of those genes will be the BDNF production. And so I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so exciting. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. And thank you so much for being on the show, Michele.
I always enjoy speaking with you, and I will be happy to come back, and I hope that you're doing well. Thank you so much.
This episode has been brought to you by the NEI Prescribe app. The most powerful tool for your prescribing arsenal is here. Based on the best-selling prescriber's guide, NEI Prescribe app gives you access to full prescribing details, including expert tips and pearls, more than 140 psychiatric drugs, and with the unique filter feature, you can identify treatment concerns specific to each patient in order to generate a customized list of possible medications to review. With full prescribing details for more than 140 psychiatric drugs, the NEI Prescribe app could help you in your practice. Go to www.neiglobal.com.